What happens when one of the most famous women in the world walks onto a daytime talk show stage and forgets that respect goes both ways? In just 32 seconds of one single comment, a guest who thought she was untouchable learned that no amount of fame gives you the right to disrespect someone in their own house. This is the story of how Meghan Markle got kicked off Tamron Hall's show after a heated exchange that nobody saw coming. The atmosphere in the studio that day was electric. Tamron Hall, one of the most respected voices in daytime television, had built her career on asking tough questions with grace and giving her guests the space to tell their stories. She was known for her warmth, her intelligence, and her ability to hold people accountable without ever losing her composure. When word got out that Meghan Markle would be sitting down for an intimate conversation, the anticipation was enormous. The audience filed in that afternoon, buzzing with excitement. This was supposed to be a conversation about reinvention, about finding your voice, about overcoming challenges. The producers had worked for weeks to make everything perfect. The lighting was soft and flattering. The set was decorated with fresh flowers. Every detail had been considered to make the guest feel comfortable and respected. Tamron walked out to thunderous applause, her smile genuine and bright. She took her seat and welcomed everyone watching at home, explaining that today's conversation would be something special. The audience settled in, phones silenced, ready to hang on every word. Then Meghan walked out. She was dressed impeccably, as always. Her outfit was carefully chosen, her makeup flawless. She waved to the audience with a practiced smile and took her seat across from Tamron. The two women exchanged pleasantries, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. Tamron asked about her latest projects, about motherhood, about the transition to life in California. Meghan answered with rehearsed talking points, the kind of responses that sounded personal, but revealed nothing real. But Tamron Hall didn't become one of the best interviewers on television by accepting surface-level answers. She knew how to dig deeper, how to ask the questions that mattered, how to push past the publicity talking points to get to something true. "I want to talk about something you said in a previous interview," Tamron said, her voice warm but direct. "You mentioned feeling silenced during certain periods of your life, but you've also had access to some of the biggest platforms in the world. How do you reconcile those two things?" It was a fair question, a good question. The kind of question that could lead to a meaningful conversation about privilege, access, and the different ways people experience being heard or unheard. Meghan's smile tightened, just slightly. "I think that's a bit reductive, Tamron," she said, her tone cooling. "Having a platform and being allowed to use your voice are two very different things." "Absolutely," Tamron agreed, nodding. "I'm just asking you to help us understand the distinction as you experienced it." "Well," Meghan said, shifting in her seat, "I'm not sure everyone would understand. It's a very specific experience." There was something in the way she said it, a dismissiveness, as if the audience, as if Tamron herself, couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of her unique situation. Tamron paused, her professional smile still in place, but her eyes had sharpened. She had interviewed presidents and criminals, celebrities and survivors. She knew when someone was being condescending. "Help us understand then," Tamron said simply. "That's why you're here, isn't it? To have a conversation?" Meghan laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Of course. I just think some things require a certain level of context that not everyone has." The audience had gone quiet. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't the inspiring conversation about empowerment they'd been promised. This was becoming something else entirely. Tamron leaned forward slightly, her posture still relaxed, but her focus intense. "Meghan, I've been a journalist for over 20 years. I've covered stories around the world. I've interviewed people from every walk of life. I think I can handle whatever context you'd like to provide." It was a gentle assertion of authority, a reminder of who was sitting in the host's chair and why. Meghan's expression hardened. "I'm sure you have, Tamron, but let's be honest. Your experiences and mine are quite different, wouldn't you say? The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. That Tamron, despite her accomplishments, despite her intelligence, despite building a career through talent and hard work, somehow couldn't understand, because her life had been, what? Less important? Less complex? Less valid? Tamron sat back in her chair, and for just a moment, she was completely still. The audience held their breath. Everyone watching could feel it. That line had been crossed. Different how? Tamron asked, her voice quiet but clear. Meghan waved her hand dismissively. You know what I mean. We come from different worlds. I've lived a very particular kind of life that comes with very particular pressures. So have I, Tamron said. So has everyone. What makes yours more particular? I didn't say more, Meghan replied, her tone sharp now. I said different. But you're implying that your different is somehow beyond my comprehension, Tamron said. I'm trying to understand why you'd suggest that. Meghan laughed again, that brittle defensive sound. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I can't even explain my own experience without being challenged on it. You're not being challenged on your experience, Tamron said, her patience clearly wearing thin. You're being challenged on the suggestion that I, or anyone else here, isn't capable of understanding it. That's not the same thing. Maybe you're just not listening, Meghan said. The gasps from the audience were audible. To tell Tamron Hall, a woman who had built her entire career on listening to people's stories with empathy and intelligence, that she wasn't listening. It was insulting. It was outrageous. Tamron's jaw tightened. I have been listening, Meghan. Very carefully. What I'm hearing is someone who wants sympathy, but not accountability. Understanding, but not questions. A platform, but not a conversation. That's incredibly unfair, Meghan shot back. Is it? Tamron asked. Because from where I'm sitting, I've asked you thoughtful questions, and you've responded by suggesting I'm not smart enough, or experienced enough, or something enough to understand your answers. So I'm asking you directly, what exactly are you trying to say? Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and be attacked. Attacked? Tamron remained seated, her voice calm but firm. Asking questions isn't attacking, Meghan. It's called an interview. This is hostile, Meghan said, her voice rising. You've been hostile since I sat down. Tamron shook her head slowly. No, Meghan. I've been professional. What you're experiencing is accountability, and apparently you're not used to it. The audience was completely silent now, on watching this surreal confrontation unfold. Nobody could quite believe what they were seeing. How dare you, Meghan said, pointing at Tamron. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've been through? Tamron stood up now, matching Meghan's energy, but with controlled grace. Yes, Meghan, I know who you are. And I also know that who you are doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful to me, or to anyone else. Fame doesn't excuse bad behavior. Bad behavior? Meghan's voice had gone shrill. You invited me here to humiliate me. I invited you here for a conversation, Tamron said firmly. You're the one who turned it into something else. You came onto my show, into this space that I've built, and you've been condescending and dismissive from the moment we moved past small talk. I asked you fair questions, and you treated me like I wasn't smart enough to hear the answers. That's not what I did, Meghan protested. Yes, it is, Tamron said, and everyone watching knows it. I've given you every opportunity to have a real conversation, and instead, you've chosen to be defensive and insulting. Meghan looked around, as if expecting someone to come to her defense. The audience stared back in silence. The producers off camera remained frozen, unsure how to intervene. This is a setup, Meghan said, her voice desperate now. You brought me here to make me look bad. Tamron laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Meghan, I didn't make you do anything. every word that's come out of your mouth has been your choice. You want to talk about being silenced? You haven't stopped talking. What you're upset about is that someone finally pushed back. I want to leave, Meghan said. Then leave, Tamron replied. Nobody's stopping you. Meghan stood there for a moment, clearly expecting Tamron to back down, to apologize, to smooth things over, the way people probably always did for her. But Tamron just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. You're really going to let me walk out? Meghan asked. I'm not letting you do anything, Tamron said. You're an adult. You can make your own choices. If you want to walk out of an interview because you don't like being asked follow-up questions, that's your decision. Meghan's face flushed red. You know what, Tamron? I thought you were better than this. I thought you were supposed to be one of the good ones. Tamron's expression didn't change. One of the good ones? She repeated. You mean one who would let you say whatever you wanted without question? One who would treat you like you're too special or too fragile for a real conversation? That's not being good, Meghan. That's being spineless. And whatever else I am, I'm not that. This is unbelievable, Meghan said, grabbing her purse from beside her chair. What's unbelievable, Tamron said, her voice rising now, is that you came on this show expecting to be worshipped instead of interviewed. What's unbelievable is that you think asking you to explain yourself is somehow an attack. What's unbelievable is that you're so used to people handling you with kid gloves that basic accountability feels like hostility. I don't have to listen to this, Meghan said. You're right, you don't, Tamron agreed. The door's right there. But let me be very clear about something, Meghan. When you walk out that door, when this airs, when people see what happened here, they're not going to see a woman who was attacked. They're going to see a woman who couldn't handle being treated like everyone else. They're going to see someone who talks about authenticity, but can't handle an authentic conversation. Meghan's hands were shaking. You're trying to ruin me. I'm not trying to do anything to you, Tamron said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. I'm just not going to pretend that this conversation went differently than it did. I'm not going to protect you from the consequences of your own words and actions. That's not my job. Your job is to make your guests feel comfortable, Meghan snapped. No, Tamron said, shaking her head. My job is to have honest conversations. Comfort is nice when it's earned, but it's not a requirement. Respect is, and you haven't shown me any. Meghan turned toward the audience, as if appealing to them directly. You all saw this, right? You saw how she treated me. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence. A few people shifted in their seats. Nobody spoke up to defend her. They saw exactly what happened, Tamron said. They saw me ask you questions. They saw you respond with condescension. They saw you try to make this about anything other than your own behavior. And now they're seeing you try to play victim when you're the one who created this entire situation. I'm leaving, Meghan announced, as if this was some kind of threat or power move. Okay, Tamron said simply. Leave. Meghan waited another beat, clearly still expecting Tamron to stop her, to apologize, to make this okay somehow. But Tamron just stood there, watching her with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and resolve. You're going to regret this, Meghan said. Tamron shook her head. No, Meghan, I'm not. Because I know I did nothing wrong. I treated you with the same respect I treat every guest who sits in that chair. I asked you fair questions. I gave you room to answer. And when you became disrespectful, I stood up for myself. I don't regret any of that. This will ruin your show, Meghan said, her voice taking on a threatening edge. My show will be fine, Tamron said calmly. It was fine before you, and it'll be fine after you. But I'll tell you what would ruin it. Compromising my integrity to coddle someone who thinks they're above being questioned. And that would ruin it. And I'm not willing to do that for you or anyone else. Meghan stared at her for a long moment, and in that silence, the full weight of what was happening seemed to finally settle on her. This wasn't going to end the way she wanted. Tamron wasn't going to fold. The audience wasn't going to rally to her defense. She had miscalculated badly. "Fine," Meghan said finally, her voice cold. "I'm done here." "Yes," Tamron agreed. "You are." Meghan turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor. Every eye in the room followed her. The silence was deafening. She reached the door and pushed through it without looking back. Tamron stood there for a moment, watching the door close. Then she turned back to the audience, took a deep breath, and sat back down in her chair. The audience erupted in applause, the sound washing over the studio like a wave. They weren't just clapping for the drama of what they'd witnessed. They were clapping for Tamron, for her dignity, for her refusal to be disrespected in her own house. Tamron raised her hand, and the applause slowly died down. She looked directly into the camera, her expression serious. "Well," she said, "that was unexpected. But let me say something to everyone watching at home. What you just saw was a reminder that respect has to go both ways. I don't care how famous you are, how much money you have, or what your title is. When you sit in that chair, you're agreeing to have a conversation. A real one. Not a performance. Not a publicity stunt. A conversation." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I ask hard questions because I respect my audience enough to know they want real answers. I push back when something doesn't make sense because I respect the truth. And I will always, always stand up for myself and for this show when someone tries to treat us with anything less than the respect we deserve." The audience applauded again, and this time Tamron smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I don't take any pleasure in what just happened," she continued. "I genuinely wanted to have a good conversation today. I prepared thoughtful questions. I came in with an open mind and an open heart. But I also came in with standards, and those standards don't change based on who's sitting across from me." She looked around the studio, making eye contact with the audience members. "Some of you might be thinking that I was too hard on her, that I should have been gentler, more understanding. And maybe you're right. Maybe I could have handled some moments differently. But what I won't apologize for is refusing to be talked down to. What I won't apologize for is expecting the same level of professionalism and respect that I give." Tamron leaned back in her chair, and the tension that had filled the room began to slowly dissipate. "You know, I've been doing this a long time. I've interviewed people who have every reason to be guarded, to be defensive. People who have been through real trauma, real hardship. And you know what? Most of them still manage to show up with grace. They still manage to have a real conversation without making it about ego or status. They still manage to treat people with basic human decency." She shook her head slightly. "Or what happened here today wasn't about asking tough questions. It wasn't about me being unfair or hostile. It was about someone who couldn't handle being treated like a regular guest instead of royalty. And I mean that both literally and figuratively." A few audience members laughed at that, the tension breaking just a little more. "But here's the thing," Tamron said, her voice growing stronger. "This show, this space, it's built on mutual respect. It's built on the idea that we can have hard conversations if we approach them with honesty and good faith. And when someone comes in without that good faith, when someone comes in with an agenda that doesn't include actual dialogue, well, you saw what happens." She picked up her notes from the side table, glanced at them, then set them back down. "We had a whole conversation planned. And we were going to talk about so many things. Important things. Meaningful things. But instead, we ended up here because someone decided that being questioned was the same as being attacked. And I can't work with that. None of us can." Tamron looked directly into the camera again. "To everyone watching, I want you to know that this show will always be a place where real conversations happen, where we don't shy away from complexity or difficulty, where we treat people with respect, but also with honesty. And if that means sometimes those conversations don't go smoothly, If that means sometimes people get uncomfortable or even walk out, then so be it. Because the alternative is to become something I never want to be. A show where famous people come to get their egos stroked instead of having actual dialogue. The audience applauded once more, longer this time, and Tamron let it wash over her. When it finally quieted, she smiled again. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for being here today. Thank you for witnessing what you witnessed. And thank you for understanding why I couldn't let that slide." She stood up, smoothing down her outfit. "We're going to take a quick break," she said. "When we come back, we're going to reset and have the conversation I originally planned to have today, just with a different guest. Because the show goes on. It always does." As the show cut to commercial, Tamron remained standing, looking at the door through which Meghan had exited. The audience watched her, this woman who had just stood her ground against one of the most famous people in the world, and hadn't flinched. One of the producers approached her, concern on their face. "Are you okay?" they asked quietly. Tamron nodded. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm proud of myself for not backing down." "That was intense," the producer said. "It was," Tamron agreed. "But it was also necessary. I've worked too hard, built this show from the ground up, to let anyone, and I mean anyone, come in here and disrespect it. Disrespect me." She took a sip of water, her hand steady. "Is she still in the building?" Tamron asked. "Her team rushed her out," the producer said. "They looked furious." Tamron shrugged. "They can be as furious as they want. I did nothing wrong. I asked fair questions and expected basic respect. That's not asking too much." Another producer joined them. "The control room is saying the phones are already lighting up. Social media is exploding." "I'm sure it is," Tamron said. "Let it explode. The truth is the truth. Everyone who was here saw what happened. Everyone watching at home will see it. I'm not worried about the court of public opinion because I know I conducted myself with integrity." The makeup artist came over to touch up Tamron's face before they went back on air. As the brush moved across her skin, Tamron closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. 30 seconds, someone called out. Tamron opened her eyes and returned to her seat. The audience watched her with admiration, with respect, with something that looked a lot like pride. This was their host. This was the woman they came to see. And she had just reminded everyone watching exactly why she had earned this chair, this platform, this voice. The lights came back up, the cameras focused, and Tamron Hall, with the grace and professionalism that had defined her career, continued her show as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Because in the end, that's what real strength looks like. Not the absence of conflict, but the ability to stand firm in your values when conflict comes, not avoiding difficult moments, but facing them head-on with dignity and truth. The rest of the show went smoothly. The replacement guest was warm and open. The conversation flowed naturally, and by the time Tamron said her final goodbyes to the audience, the earlier drama felt almost surreal, almost like it hadn't really happened, but it had happened. And everyone knew it. The footage would be played and replayed. The moment would be analyzed and discussed. People would take sides, would argue about who was right and who was wrong. But Tamron Hall would sleep well that night, knowing that she had stood up for herself, for her show, and for the principle that respect isn't negotiable. That fame doesn't excuse poor behavior. That even the most celebrated guests have to understand that an interview is a conversation, not a coronation. As she left the studio that evening, walking past the photos of past guests and memorable moments that lined the hallways, Tamron knew that today would be remembered. Not because of who walked out, but because of who remained. Not because of the tantrum thrown, but because of the dignity maintained. She had invited a guest into her house. Metaphorically speaking, and that guest had shown her disrespect. And Tamron, with millions watching, had done what anyone should do in that situation. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and refused to compromise her values for anyone. That's the story of how Meghan Markle got kicked off Tamron Hall's show. Not because Tamron was cruel or unfair or hostile, but because Tamron understood something that her guest apparently didn't. That respect, like trust, has to be earned and maintained. And once it's lost, no amount of fame or status can get it back.